The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are so very lucky to be talking to Dr. Sarah Roberts. She's a leading scholar in the field of digital labor and content moderation, known for her pioneering research on the hidden workforce behind social media platforms. She is a full professor at UCLA, where she examines the intersection of technology, society, and labor. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you. So I'm going to ask you the first little question, and it's you coined the term commercial content moderation. Can you actually explain what that really means?
Sure. So back when I first started thinking about the practices, the people, and the policies that make up what we broadly construe as content moderation of social media, it was important to make a distinction uh, between what had transpired on the internet to that point,
Mm.
and then sort of what was different, what was remarkable, what was of concern about the new era into which we'd entered. And so, it was important to me to underscore the fact that decision making about what people did and didn't do or could and couldn't say on the internet was a part of the social internet from its inception.
Mm.
It took many forms. So in some cases, it felt as though anything went. If you
Yeah.
if you ever cut your teeth on a Usenet group that was not really moderated back in the day, um, or were in any number of spaces where there was sort of a collective and tacit understanding that people were just going to do whatever they wanted. That is, in fact, a form of governance. It's a form of content moderation, and it's an organizational form. Um, but typically, even in the early days of the internet, when people were involved in social spaces, such as myself, there
Mm.
were rules of engagement, and there were people responsible for enforcing those rules. But typically, they were volunteers.
Ah.
Or, in the early days, let's say of AOL, it was a little bit of uh, more more organized, but nothing that approached the industrial scale that has become the chosen kind of mechanism to deal with content moderation of social media and of just about everything else. So that was the need at the time to sort of not make a claim, a false claim. I thought that content moderation was um, somehow completely new and born of commercialized social media. Rather, the way that it came to be enacted met the needs of for-profit companies who were
Mm.
in the business of using the internet to make tons of money
Yeah.
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
still are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, that kind of developing that at scale workforce was in direct response to the scale of the platforms as they were growing.
Well, I know
Mm.
this term human in the loop,
Yeah.
Mhm.
is something that I've only recently been familiar with, even though Caroline and I have spent a lot of time studying internet and AI. It's sort of a something that seems to be swept under the rug,
Yeah.
really. People don't really discuss it. And I think on Reddit, you have a moderator, you know who the moderator is. Well, you don't necessarily know who the
Yeah.
moderator is, but there is a moderator. Whereas on sites like, Facebook, Instagram, they have billions of people using their
Yeah.
website, And what does it mean to moderate that? And I know you have talked about the traumatic things that these people see.
Yeah, human in the loop is sort of like inside baseball talk that you hear if you work in tech,
Yeah.
or if you're in, you're a software engineer, or if you're an insider at any of these companies. I think it's kind of a silly term in the sense that there is no kind of computational anything without traces of humans all over it, in it, around it, about it. So it's sort of a term of art that I think tells us more about how tech firms think about what they do and how they do it,
Yeah.
rather than being reality based.
Yeah.
Even automated systems. I mean, there are humans all over building those systems, and so, that term kind of calls attention to where those people sit. It's more like where they sit in the production chain in the case of content moderation, whether it's um, kind of a more direct production floor situation where people are indeed making decisions about things that are on the platform, or it's some sort of automated system that is built on the intelligence of
Mm.
millions upon millions of those decisions in aggregate, as well as things like data sets that are prepared and evaluated by humans too.
Mm.
So there's sort of a one of the kind of underlying myths, I think, or fantasies about the internet for most people is that it is something outside of um, human control in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. And you make the point that on somewhere like Reddit, there is like this tangible trace of a moderator. You'll see somebody come in and make a post with a flag that says mod, right? And so
Right.
that's who that is. Although that is a site that uses sort of a hybrid approach where it has these volunteer moderators for subreddits. We could start a subreddit right now and we could anoint ourselves the moderators of the subreddit,
Mhm.
and that would be the case. But Reddit certainly has a, team of thousands of people who deal with things that rise to sort of a higher level of concern. And,
Yeah.
just because the three of us might decide that it's totally great um, in our subreddit to post threatening and violent
Mm.
content, that would, Reddit has to have a means to control that. So then, these shadow folks who aren't really identified and aren't really able to be perceived would do that most likely.
So in a
Mm.
certain way, you're saying that it is a three-card Monty type thing to be saying that the internet doesn't have human fingerprints all over it in every aspect of it, and it's maybe a game and a terminology and a way of thinking that these big tech companies would like us to feel.
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't I think you're already going there to think about, well, what are the implications if people do hold a sort of like a general consensus that there isn't the trace of human decision making all over the place on platforms. The implication to me is pretty clear, which is that we aren't responsible, right? We're not
Yeah.
culpable legally in the United States, but sort of from on a more fundamental level, we are not in any way morally or otherwise responsible for the fruits of our, what is produced via our products. And that's a pretty convenient place to be, I
Yeah.
imagine,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
There are times at which content moderation protects users and keeps them out of harm's way, addresses behavior that is antisocial, addresses content that is harmful. But I really encourage people to think about that as more of a happy coincidence than the point of content moderation. Because
Mm.
the point of content moderation is not for people like us. It's for the firms to protect their brand. So really, content moderation of social media is really about making platforms viable and palatable to advertisers. And a lot of times I think about that as being, two things that are on parallel tracks, right? And sometimes they cross and coincide, and sometimes they sort of coexist and it keeps, things moving. Um, but at the end of the day, the decisions that get made are in the service of the platform, and if that happens to coincide with the best, uh, sort of uh, what's best for the user base, that's great.
So in a certain way, what you're saying is this quote unquote protection that Facebook, Meta, you name it, OpenAI, all this stuff that they're doing is not out of the goodness of their own hearts. It's out of the goodness of commerce, them trying to make a buck.
Sure, and really the question we should ask ourselves is why would we anticipate it being any different? Um, and the answer is because we've been led to believe that
Yeah.
in large part. We've been led to believe that these platforms are number one champions, bar none, of an American concept of
Yeah.
freedom of speech, which is a distorted concept that comes from the Constitution of the United States that has to do with citizens' rights unto the
Yeah.
government, right? Doesn't really have anything to do with what the hell Meta wants to do
Yeah.
as a private corporation. But early on, these companies, private in the sense that it's not, a public good. Obviously, they're publicly traded, but um, early on, these companies aligned themselves with these principles that are very appealing. Who doesn't want to feel like they have free speech? Who doesn't want to feel like they can say whatever they want without consequence? I mean, go down on the street corner and say whatever you want to someone, and you'll probably have a different outcome in a lot of places in the
Yeah.
country. You know what I mean?
Yes,
That's true.
exactly. Yeah. That's
But
true.
but there was this idea early on that these companies used to their benefit to suggest that they were maybe one of the only bastions of true freedom of expression, a l'Americaine, which does not really track in a lot of places in the world. Um, but what actually intrigued me, among many other things, about studying content moderation early on, was to try to show the world, hey, you think you have unfettered ability to do or say whatever you want online. The case is absolutely different from that. You have no idea who or what adjudicate what is online and why you see what you see. And that puts us at a disadvantage. We don't really understand fundamental things about how the platforms work, to include the fact that we are actually the product. We are the product on sale. We are being sold to advertisers, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is how this
Yeah.
ecosystem has come to exist, and it can only exist when you put all those pieces together and understand, well, what's the need for that content moderation? And if they aren't invested in, these companies aren't invested in the totalizing free speech principle, what are they invested in, right? And those are very uncomfortable questions for these
Yeah.
firms. They don't like to be asked that or
No.
be held accountable. Yeah.
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, now I think early in January they took away. I don't know actually, but I mean the third party fact checking, right? What does that actually really compare to, the content moderation and this fact check? Is
Well,
that really
I
gonna
think
fact
one of
check
the most
ourselves?
successful rollouts of that kind of uh again, very, very easy to see kind of um intervention on things that people post, it was
Mm.
Twitter. Twitter rolled out what they called Birdwatch at the time, because he's a marketing genius. When Elon Musk took over and decided to trash the Twitter brand, which arguably was the most valuable asset of the entire
Yeah.
company, besides its user base, which he also decimated. He took the very cleverly named Birdwatch, which only made sense if it was, under the aegis of something called Twitter, which had a bird logo, and he turned it into something called Community Notes. I mean, yeah, that really rolls off the tongue, Elon. But of course, Community Notes is the enemy of someone like Elon Musk, who's a BS artist and trades in that on the daily. So, typically third-party fact-checking has to do with, regular folks intervening, right? And so that's sort of a different framing, but I think is, very reasonably could be argued is a form of content moderation. Because it takes many forms. I mean, we've talked about at least 3 already, like volunteers, moderation of specific fora or subreddits or discords or whatever the container is, and then like a huge industrial army of moderators who are global and who are pretty much unseen and who by design are supposed to leave no trace.
So in a certain way, my mental health has been shifted over to some poor person in a global South country who is taking on the responsibility of watching awful things that will never make it to me, but they have to watch those awful things.
I mean, it's pretty dystopian when you put it that
Yeah.
way, but I think it's like the basis for a Black Mirror episode. It's good sci-fi, but it's actually reality. In my book, which is called Behind the Screen: Content Moderation in the Shadows of Social Media, I talk about one woman who describes herself as a sin eater. And a sin eater was a person in the British Isles, essentially in sort of contemporary UK, who was a person in a village, usually destitute, who would upon the death of a member of the community, a loaf of bread would be passed over the corpse. And the idea was that all of the sins of this person would be sort of like sucked into this loaf of bread.
Oh my
And
goodness.
this destitute poor member of the community would eat the sins of the deceased person, so that person could kind of go off to heaven. And I thought that metaphor was incredible. And she came up with that to describe her own feelings of,
And she's somebody working as a content moderator or making somebody basically saving us from watching awful things.
Yeah, this was a woman who was working sort of in a prototypical context where she was like she was supposed to be a part-time moderator of, I think, particular like news comment forums back when those were more easily posted to. I mean, you still can, of course, and you can do it on Facebook, but this was when like a lot of news sites were running their own comments sections. And she would talk about, I'm part-time. I left to go out to dinner, but like during dinner, all I could think about was the chaos that was going on the forum in my absence and all of the abuse that was taking place of people who are more like me than dissimilar from me, because she was a person of a minoritized identity. And, she felt like she had a moral obligation to protect people from the abuse and invective that they would receive. For what? For minimum wage, or for, I think she was actually fairly well paid relatively. But I mean, for a part-time gig that was supposed to be not a heavy lift, it turned out to be this like emotional burden and she had a real sense of turmoil around it. And it was not by any means pleasant. So you're right in the sense that the idea is that these people catch and remove things or flag them, or in the case of automated systems, they might actually be engaged in seeing nothing but
yeah.
that kind of content and
Uh,
affirming that it's
mm,
quote unquote bad as
no,
they
my.
build models for the automation to
Right.
take place, right? Whether it's a main model or, in the case of LLMs, or some kind of like adversarial model. In other words, like, do not include this, miasma
No.
of nightmarish crap.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so for a long time, I was told by various people who, probably wanted to believe that this was the case, that automation would quote unquote solve this. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Meta's own chief AI guy, Jan LeCun, posted on Twitter not that long ago, a few years ago, that Meta had indeed solved content moderation. And that's an absurd statement, because first of all, there is no solve state for content moderation. There's no solve. There's no we did it, we got it, it's done. What he was alluding to, I presume, was that AI was being deployed en masse at scale to deal with these issues. And, the statistic that companies like Meta and others will give is, we catch 96% of unwanted content via AI automation. Our tools do this and whatever. But that really doesn't account for things like the relative impact of what is being screened out. So sure, a bunch of spam ads, or
Mm-hmm.
spammy content or whatever, that's one thing. Seeing a video of
Ugh.
child
Oh,
sexual
yeah.
exploitation, or
Mm.
abuse or harm, or something really, really powerfully emotionally damaging,
No, of
is not
course
the
not.
same. So there's no accounting for that. But he was boldly proclaiming um that it was solved. And when I asserted that I thought that was an inaccurate statement, he basically was like, well, who the hell are you? And I was like,
Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Caroline and I were talking that maybe AI and social media content is sort of like the new blood diamond
Mm.
in a certain way. That we don't understand the pain we are causing others to get
Yeah.
something that we enjoy and want
Mm.
desperately.
I mean, it shouldn't be lost on us that Elon Musk's family owned an emerald mine
Yes.
in
Right.
apartheid South Africa. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't, the metaphor makes itself, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Talk about a person who will have no regard for the welfare of others.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
point blank, period, the end, under a system
Mm.
expressly designed to dehumanize entire swaths of the populace, as if, just the professor in me needs to make the statement, of course, that where did apartheid South Africa get its great ideas? From the Jim Crow era in the United States. So,
Yeah.
the apple
Yeah.
doesn't fall far from the tree. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, there are consequences to our engagement on these
Yeah.
platforms, and they take all kinds of different forms. I think turning the American political landscape into something that feels like rooting for your sports team of choice is a direct consequence of sort of
Mm.
the commoditization of every kind of interaction that we have interpersonally and at a larger scale as well.
Mm.
If there's we there's two things going on in the phrase content moderation. One of them is moderation, but the other one is content. And so I think it behooves us to also say, well, what the hell does that mean? Since when?
Yeah.
Since when
Yeah.
have we talking? Everybody that since when have they been using a term like content to describe a thing they read, or something they heard, or a podcast they
Yeah.
listened to, or an image they saw, or a short video. And about what? Everything is content.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Mona
That's a good
Lisa,
point.
the Mona Lisa is content.
Yeah.
A video of a kid farting is content. And to the
Yeah.
firms, right? To the firms, there's absolutely no other measure of value than engagement metrics, right? So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
those things can be said with a straight face.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like most people, you go on Facebook or you go on whatever people do, TikTok, and they're thinking, funny dance videos or whatever, and we don't realize what actually is happening.
There's an adage about not wanting to show the customer how the sausage is made, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what would happen if we saw what went into the sausage?
We wouldn't eat it.
Right,
No.
right? We'd be so grossed out. I mean,
Yeah.
if we saw most people, if they saw any portion of like industrial meat production, I would personally have to go into like some trauma therapy for that myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Oof,
so
yeah. Yeah.
right,
Oof,
so
yeah.
that's hidden from view. And what do we buy at the store? Well, we buy a very like um, cleaned up set of chicken breasts that bear no resemblance to an actual bird.
So it is, I think it is more disturbing than you could even imagine, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And when you're talking about the sausage or the
Yeah,
rotisserie chicken.
right. And so look, why is there a place where there are highly educated people who can't make a living in other ways? Like, let's start there. There's a whole historical and economic analysis that has to take place around the nature of these firms. And, again, I write about that at length in my book because I end up going to the Philippines after looking for traces of content moderation in North America and a little bit closer to my home. Companies in the United States looked at the Philippines as a great place to get their needs met as cheaply as possible at a bottom line kind of consideration. And it's no accident that the Philippines provides that, because what was the history of the Philippines over the last century and a half? Well,
Imperials.
right. First, it was dominated by Spain. After the, Spanish-American War, the United States became the colonizer, effectively, of the Philippines, militarily, economically, and culturally. And so, for a century, the American military presence was keenly felt there. And those traces are now economically advantageous for American companies. So, advertising their content moderation services to American companies, some of these outsourcing firms say things like, Filipinos have a great grasp of American culture and slang, as if that's just by accident, as if that just happened for no reason. So, it's important to articulate that this whole ecosystem banks on the existence of this kind of economic disparity that came from the domination of one country over another. And now we're turning around and asking them to do our literal shit work.
So you see this guy, Sam Altman, and I had seen a report. I don't know who did it, to be honest with you, but it was about exploiting people with PhDs to basically do, terrible work. And then around that same time, an image of him driving a $5 million car came out, because he's always sort of trying to give the sense, as Mark Zuckerberg did at the beginning of his tenure, that, oh, I'm just a regular guy. And so those two images back to back tell you what's at work, which is the profit motive, and not just a profit motive, but a super supernormal profits. I have a degree in economics. Supernormal profits beyond what a firm should get by pushing out others. You get supernormal profits. And this guy with a blue backpack, who's supposed to be just like you and I, is after supernormal profits. He wants a lot of money. He wants that $5 million car. And that's kind of hard to stomach when I'm using his
Yeah.
product,
Well, and to that end, I want to bring up the fact that I don't know if they still have it up, but for a long time, when discussing artificial general intelligence, OpenAI said that their central goal in developing it was to develop systems that could, and now I quote, perform most economically valuable tasks better than humans. So
Wonderful.
it's
Yeah.
right there in plain English. Like
Yeah.
so, I think there's a lot of like really interesting questions to be asked about our own capacity to look at someone like him or look at a project like AGI and fill it in with our own best hopes, even when it says right there on the box, that's not what it's for. And let me tell you something, the goal of AGI and the goal of companies like OpenAI and its leadership is not to generate unusually high profits to then redistribute those profits to everyone.
No.
It is
No.
to develop them and hoard them to the point of obscenity among such a small few, anointed few people, the Bezoses and the Zuckerbergs and the Musks, even though, these guys, they are pathological, actually. And I'm not sure where we went from people having like a hoarding disorder, which is generally not considered a good thing to have,
No.
to looking at those people with a hoarding disorder who have a pathological need to consume and accumulate, putting them on a pedestal and saying they're great because what they happen to hoard is wealth.
Yeah.
If they hoarded uh you know uh, precious moments figurines, we'd have another conversation, right? But they
Get help.
Yeah.
Get help.
right but they'd be on an A&E show, we'd be cleaning out their crazy house.
Yeah.
So we've got some real problems from top to bottom socially in our country, where I think because these terms and these concepts about what these products do either have been strategically miscommunicated to the public or are so nebulous that they allow for this, people fill in their own aspirations and their own expectations about what those things are. Meanwhile, the heads of those companies are over here doing a whole other thing.
Well, I think people have
Yeah.
trouble understanding the difference between 100 million and 200 billion. I think at certain point it's lost. It's difficult to sort of conceptualize that type of wealth.
We are talking
Yeah.
about things that humans really can't conceptualize. When we talk about like profit sharing companies where employee owned companies and so on, that there might be a model there where those profits get redistributed or some portion thereof gets redistributed. And so, you could argue that there's an incentive for workers to work better or harder or more innovatively or whatever. But I will sit here and tell you just point blank that what I think all of this stuff, AGI, automation, AI, turning content moderators, human content moderators into people who just sort data to make content moderation machines that are automated, et cetera. It's all about taking that cost center in, kind of business terms called labor
Yeah.
and reducing that cost to damn near as close to zero as they can get. And
Yeah.
so what that involves is devaluing the human contribution, doing things like saying you're the human in the loop instead of the machine is in the human loop. right?
Yeah, that's a very good
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
And I had a friend of mine come on the program who was successful in Silicon Valley, and he retired. And he said, the most important thing you can know about these guys, he said, was in one example, which was, he said, Mark Zuckerberg turned down a $600 million
Yeah.
offer for Facebook early on. And he said, who turns down $600 million? He says, it's got to be a pathology. It has
Yeah,
to be.
it did. Yeah. And I actually thought about that comment earlier too, what he said when we would start talking about this. Yeah, who turns that down? What even $600
What's the
million?
mentality, right?
Yeah.
Hoarding, like you said, it's
Hoarding.
actually a good,
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way,
Listen,
but
listen, you want to take a walk down untreated mental health issues that are disguised as socially acceptable pathologies. Spend some time on LinkedIn.
okay,
You
yeah.
know, go
We talked
read
about that.
these posts of self-described founders. Yeah, man, I grind 80 hours a week. And just like, you're not serious unless you know, for what purpose? Like, when is enough
Yeah.
enough?
When it's enough.
Yeah.
Exactly. When
When
is
are
enough?
you good? But meanwhile, millions of Americans are about to lose their health care.
Like, what is the state of mind on those people? I mean, as you said earlier, when is enough enough? Why would we want to make, let's say, have robots doing our jobs? Why do we want whatever it is? Like, what are we doing to ourselves? Why do we even
You
listen
introduce
to this?
automation that will increase efficiency. What's efficiency in the context of these conversations? Well, it's a ratio of like output versus
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
cost, right? It's a productivity metric.
When
And
something's efficient, you just have more time to do more stuff, and they take
right,
advantage of the efficiency.
right, right. So they don't actually say, "Hey, Seth, man, you're a great worker, but we just put this thing on your assembly line that's going to allow you to do what your daily quota is in half the time. Why don't you go ahead and take the rest of the day off? We're good." No, what are they going to say to you?
Do more, make more. Now your quota has
Yes.
increased.
Right. They're gonna say, "Wow, seems like this automation that we've this assistive technology that we've thrown on over the layer of your job is actually telling us that you're capable of maybe
Yeah.
double
Yeah. Yeah.
your effort. So your new quota is
Yeah.
double."
Yep.
And I can tell you that in the context of content moderation, when I was in the Philippines talking to workers there, this is what they told me was routinely happening to them. They would be threatened that their contract would leave the Philippines and go to another nation state, such as usually it was the specter of India that was held over their heads, whether true or not. And if they didn't increase their productivity, that contract would up and move. In other words, at one point they had 32 seconds to make a decision about a piece of content, and that was changed
Oh
to
my
13
goodness.
seconds.
You're
Yeah.
ruining the internet, by the way, for me. I mean, I was happily using
Not anymore.
ChatGPT last night, but not anymore.
Listen, um, I didn't ruin the internet and you didn't ruin the internet, but people like Mark
Yeah.
Zuckerberg ruined the internet,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, because there are other ways of doing things that don't have to be so fundamentally anti and anti-human and extractive. Like,
Anti-human.
we can imagine all kinds of ways of being, but unfortunately, we have elevated people who don't seem to have much relationship to humanity to
Right.
run systems that are predicated on human nature. Like, does anybody see that as a fundamental mismatch? I do. I'm trying to remember that one of the things about the early internet that I loved was that it made me feel like I had a bigger community than I maybe had right at my doorstep. And I am friends with people that I met online 33 years ago to this day.
Yeah. Wow.
And we talk every day. And when I go to the countries where they live, because a lot of those friends live outside the US, we hang out, or they visit me, or they're friends out of state, but I know what's going on intimately with their lives. Those are the connections that I made on the early internet. And it happened without any commercial advertising, without any big company infrastructure supporting it. I was on a BBS that was literally run out of a closet in Iowa City. You know, those types of connections online are not impossible.
Who's in the lead? I mean, it does feel like a sporting event when I read articles, you know, who's currently the wealthiest man in the world. And it's a strange, why are we cheerleading that? This is bad for us. Why are we cheerleading?
I don't know.
The wealth is not accumulated without great human cost and suffering. And
That is
for
the absolute truth.
for me, content moderation of social media is an incredibly on the nose example of how that works. There are other ways, and that's the part that these totalizing ecosystems want you to forget. There are other ways, and you don't have to find, you know, an alternative for every single aspect of your life. But what if you find one today?
I grew up, you know, without the internet and without the social media. And when you had all the connection with your friends and you're hanging out and you talked, you didn't text, you actually talked on the phone or you saw each other. But the new generation of kids who grew up in this digital world, they don't know what we are talking about in the same way.
I mean, I'm about to turn 50, and so I've seen that all too, right? And I've also I am a critic of the commercial internet, not because I hate the internet, but because I know it can be so much more and so many different things, and it
Yes.
has been.
Yeah.
And I resent the co-opting of the
Yeah.
medium
Yeah.
and the commercialization of it into its crassest, most reductionist, base, least human form. Again, where everything is reduced to engagement metrics.
Well, at the end of the day, they took something that was built by, well, the government and universities that was meant for communicating,
Research.
research and communication,
Communication.
and they've absolutely bastardized what its original intent was and have made it a profit mechanism, which I don't think anybody in 1991, 2, 3, and 4 was really, they weren't working so hard to make this thing work so that Sam Altman could drive a $5 million car.
I mean, I think what people really need to do is ask themselves, who is this shit for?
Yeah.
Is it for me? Is this to make my life materially better?
Yeah.
Is this to make my life easier? Does this allow me to work less? Does this allow me to get more for less? Probably not.
No.
So if it's not for me, it's probably against me. I'm probably the product. I'm probably the thing that's going to get exploited by this.
Yeah.
Stop using that shit. Go to the library, talk to your friend, use your head. You know, like we're capable of it.
I've got to say that this has been extremely wonderful, and I think actually in a certain way, even though it's sort of a negative statement, I think it's a good place to stop because there is some hope in taking ownership of your own behavior.
It's really also, you know, on like the hopeful side of things, it's about like looking around you at the riches that are right there in your own life and remembering to value those in a different way. Nobody's going to take their last dying breath wishing they'd left one more upvote on Reddit. We're going to be thinking about the people we love, you
Exactly.
know? the way we spent our time,
Yeah.
what really mattered, the funniest thing that ever happened to me with this friend, or when I met my spouse, or whatever the thing is. And why are we looking beyond
Yeah.
some of that stuff? I'm really trying to find ways back to it. I was talking with this friend who came over yesterday. We're going to have a dinner party and invite a bunch of people over to just get together. I don't remember the last time I had a dinner party. It's going to be simple. I'm not going to cook crazy stuff, like it might just be pasta or something. But the point is to get everybody to come over and hang out. That's what we're going to do. That's like the little thing. But I can
Yeah.
control that. I actually can't stop Sam Altman.
Yeah.
Despite my best efforts. I thought I would write a book about content moderation that would blow the lid off some stuff and make people pissed off and demand other ways. And to my surprise, that's not really what
Yeah.
happened. Although I invite everybody to read it and talk about it, with each other and think about it.
Yeah.
But it takes
Yeah.
more than that. It's going to take more than that. And so there are little ways every day. I'm not asking everybody to get off social media, and I'm not asking myself to do that.
Because we want to inform people any kind of way. We want to talk to people like you. We want to talk to people who explain what algorithm is, or the dark web, or whatever it is, like, to inform. And I think it's so important that we actually know. And I think they're not telling us the truth. We don't know that we have workers sitting for $1 and say horrible things. We don't know anything. We just go online, and that's why it's so important to be transparent, and we can talk and learn. Anyway, so that's our little
Well, I think
soapbox.
it's a great thing to do. I love to listen to podcasts. I have to drive a lot because I live in Southern California, and that's like the culture here. And
Yeah.
so I try to listen to stuff like that too for edification, but also for like a sense of community, a sense of solidarity, a sense of agency over my own life. I mean, they might have billions of dollars, but we are billions of people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good
Oh, I
point.
like that one. That's a
Yeah.
really good point. We should end it
Yeah.
on that note, because that's a good one.
Yeah.
Hey, let's
That's
end on
all I
that note.
got. That's all
All
I
right.
got. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very, very
Thank you
much.
so much
I
for being
really
here.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.